Man argument.
Thanks, Jeff. Good to be here. We're coming at you from scrum.org headquarters in Boston, Massachusetts this week.
Well, let's be clear. You're coming from there. I'm coming from Downers Grove, Illinois, and it is wonderful here.
You can tell it's a scrum.org place because there's Post-its all over the walls, various projects and thought processes halfway thought through. Everybody's got ideas, and when Agilists get together and have ideas, Post-its just come out naturally. It happens.
And you can tell I'm in a sales office because I've got some cheesy taglines behind me.
Yeah, and a nice picture that makes you feel motivated. That's definitely a symbol. Well, and a fire. Let's be clear, man. Like you're in a sales office because you have a fireplace there. I'm assuming that there's a bar and probably a cigar sitting around because this is.
I got the globe right over here.
Yeah, you got the globe. Nice.
All right, I appreciate it. I'm excited for this one because I think this is going to be a fun one, especially coming from Scrum.org. Eric, Agile should be everywhere. An entire company should go to Agile. Everybody should be doing Agile. I don't understand the argument against that.
Yeah, well, this is a good one. I really like this question because I do think that there's a real argument to be made why this idea that Agile, and maybe specifically, is just for software. So I'll give the best version of that argument, and then we can talk about why that argument maybe doesn't hold water all the way. But the best version of this argument is very simple. The Agile Manifesto is the Agile Manifesto for software development, right? So it was focused on software for 22 years now, or however long it's been since we've had the Agile Manifesto. And Scrum is quite similar, not quite the same. There's more examples to be given, more counter examples to be given of early Scrum projects that weren't purely software. But surely some of the early versions of the Scrum Guide and trainings and teachings around Scrum in the early days, again, I'm talking more than 10 years ago, were almost strictly for software teams, or at least IT tech teams. So there's a strong case to be made, maybe mostly historical case to be made, that, hey, this Agile movement started off in software, took hold in software. You and I might argue about whether or not it started in software, but it took hold in software, in the 2000s, right?
Oh, so many good jokes. I think it started in manufacturing and it took hold in software. I agree.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that philosophy too. But just historically speaking, all of the early examples of people doing Agile, people doing Scrum, have all been software projects. A bunch of bleed over into software hardware combinations, a bunch of bleed over into IT tech, but at the basis of it was always around software. And this makes sense, right? When software is a new technology, people haven't been writing software for 100 years. We've only been writing software for 50 years, maybe a little longer. And there's a bunch of things that changed really fast. A bunch of people got into doing this type of work. We had to make teams of people work together. We built all of the simple things in the 80s and 90s, and now we're building huge, complex things with millions of lines of code and things like that. We're going to have to figure out how to do it better and more efficiently. It's not going to benefit from, it wasn't going to benefit from just kind of run-of-the-mill improvements. So things like Agile and Scrum came along to kind of hit the restart button and start thinking about the crafting of these products in a different way.
So out of that,
no, I think that's the argument for it. Out of that, like all of the things that were developed in the early 2000s and even 2010s, 90+% of them came out of software, right? We talk about things like the importance of a definition of done. And sure, that's a global concept, but all of the examples that we have to give come out of software. We talk about things like the importance of keeping tech debt low. Again, that could be a globalized example, but all of the examples that we do have are coming out of software. So all the tools and techniques that we've built up around Agile and Scrum predominantly come from technology and specifically software projects. So I think there's a strong case to that. Hey, look, Agile is for software, Scrum is for software. We should just keep it there. Why go through the pain of trying to make these things work outside of software development? All right, so that's my version of the argument. Where there's so much. Historically, it started there, and there's so much stuff that we've created, tools and techniques and things that maybe aren't proper Agile or Scrum, like by the book definition, but things that we've done over the years to augment the way that we do software development projects. It's all in software.
So I find this interesting. I did not expect it to go here. It sounds like you're taking the Scrum perspective of this. We don't need to go anywhere else. We have a great niche. Why are we trying to branch out anywhere else? Let's own software development and not move anywhere. My question to you, is there an argument? You're a CEO of a 25 million, 50 million, $75 million company. What's the argument for them not to be doing Agile across the business?
Well, so I don't have a good argument for that. I think you should be. I think these things are globalizable, and the Scrum framework or any sort of a set of Agile tools or techniques could be used in multiple different contexts. But I think the thing to understand is if you're running into this conversation at your company where people are like, hey, that's just for software, don't just throw that out the window right away. There's an argument to be made that historically this came for software. All of the examples and tools and techniques that we've built up around Agile and Scrum are predominantly software examples. So like
I'm gonna
pull exists, but now we have to figure out how to apply these things outside of software.
So I want to push you a little bit here because I think this is interesting, and we know we're in alignment here. We believe in this mindset and this approach as a holistic approach, and we believe if it's holistic, it goes better. Here would be my question to you. Share the first tenet of Agile.
The first tenet of Agile. I guess it's like if you want the original Agile manifesto, the first tenet is the people and processes.
You broke up on me a little bit there. I had a little static. You say there one more time.
Yeah, sorry. The first tenet is individuals and people over processes and tools. Individuals, interactions, conversations over processes and tools.
See, and you just mentioned a bunch of things. And one, I'm going to point out when you made the best form of the argument, you said it started in software. And what you just told me is individuals and interactions over process and tools. And I can make an argument that goes back to the 20s and 30s and definitely in the 60s and 70s in the manufacturing, evolution. When we started going towards, and I'll use the term lean mindset, but this total quality mindset, lean mindset, and all of that started with empowering your people and started with it's people over process. Now, process and discipline unlocked the people, but it was interactions and how do people work together. And the point that I was trying to make there is when you get down to it and you look at the principles of any of these tools, and whether it's transparency, whether it's using data to make good decisions, and I don't know the exact, I won't quote Scrum perfectly here, but we're talking transparency, we're talking use data, we're talking small batch iterations. All of those mindsets are more important than the tools. And all of those mindsets are holistic beliefs. And if your company doesn't believe in those holistically, all you're really doing is introducing a set of tools. And here's my fear, Eric, and I'm going to be very direct with this. When we talk the way that some of these management techniques and methods and operating systems for businesses have gone, I'm worried that Agile and Scrum is going to go the same way. And when you look at the total quality management and manufacturing movements, and I think most people would identify it as lean, but when we're talking about Deming and Ono and the people that came from the Toyota way and things like that, what happens is when it got here and when it got into leadership's hands, they turned it into a series of tools and said, stay over in our manufacturing, stay over in how the work gets produced. Some of them even broke into services, but it didn't break into the whole company. You take
Yeah.
theory of constraints and the tools and the way that they approach things, and it was okay, fine, that's great. Stay in your lane.
Yep.
And what happens is it got broken into a series of tools. The tools then didn't have nearly the level of effectiveness. And when you talk about lean and all of that stuff, people are like, oh, that's that thing that happened in the 80s and 90s. We don't know.
Or it's that 5-day event that I go to once a year to change the way that we do X, Y, or Z.
Exactly. And so I think, and here's Eric, and I am unapologetically wanting to push the lean world into this. I'm unapologetically wanting to push Scrum into this. I want to see this bring holistically, and I certainly want to see it come to sales and marketing. And the idea is there's a certain set of core principles we should all agree on when we're working in a company. Transparency. I know that's one that goes across all of these management methods, but you need to agree and be transparent on your management method.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting to me here is, like, I think Agile and Scrum suffer from the same kind of attachment to software as Lean does. Lean suffers from the attachment to manufacturing.
Yeah.
You and I, we can both talk about how we could apply these concepts elsewhere in an organization, but because of the history, because of how they started, because of how they were attached, there's always some resistance, or there's people at least asking a legitimate question like, is this going to work in marketing or in sales? Because I thought that this was only about manufacturing or software. And then we just have to do the actual work, right? Like the Agile Manifesto has those 4 value statements and 12 principles, and perhaps they can apply, like copy and paste apply to marketing, or perhaps we have to do the work, right? We have to sit down and read over these things and ask ourselves, how do these apply? And there's no rule, there's no reason that the kind of a manifesto for Agile marketing, and I just keep using marketing as an example, just no specific attachment, but like, there's no reason that a manifesto for Agile marketing couldn't contain 3 values or 8 values, or 5 values, right? It's just that when the folks that wrote that manifesto sat down and did this, they specifically have the software development context.
Yeah, and I think you're spot on there. And I think here's where we run into a couple things. When we say Agile marketing, we're still developing it for one part of the business. And then, my first thought was, why not just call it Agile revenue generation? Well, that's still one part of the business. And what you and I'm going to speak for you here a little bit, because me and you have had this discussion 84 times. When you take these small businesses, when you take startups, it's the value stream map that you need to be managing. And you mentioned it, it's interactions. So if your revenue team is not interacting with your support team, which is interacting with your product development team, if all of those aren't in the same theory, you're going to get more friction. And I'm going to give you a Steelman argument that we heard, and I want to discuss pretty quickly here.
Okay.
How am I supposed to expect the other people in our organization to learn this? They're like,
say that again. How can we expect the people?
Yeah, I mean, you and I were on the same chain talking to a business leader and a board member at that said, "Wait, our team's going to be able to learn this? They're going to have to change." That's the argument against it. What do you say to that?
I'm sure that's a Steelman argument, right? Like this is so hard. We're going to have to change, so it follows that we shouldn't do it. Like it's not a real argument there. It's just more of a fear, I guess, or just knowing that it's going to be hard and not easy.
And you've been a Scrum trainer for how long?
10 years now, almost exactly.
And that's the last time you got a haircut too. But I think the fun part here is the idea that when Scrum was first introduced to software development, you met with the same resistance. Our leadership team has to learn and change. Wait, our developers are going to have to learn to change. What is this product owner, and what's a Scrum Master?
Yeah, and it's even deeper, right? Like 10 years ago, we were having conversations about how do we get coders and testers to work in shorter feedback loops? Because obviously you can't test that. There's nothing faster to do before the code has been written, right? And that was a maybe not a deeply held belief, but it was an assumption that had to be challenged. And we had to come up with tools and techniques for how to get coders and testers to work together. But we don't have the conversation anymore. I can't remember the last time I encountered resistance for having coders and testers sitting on the same team. But today, we do get resistance for all sorts of other things, like marketing. Like what we need somebody from marketing on this product development team. Oh no, marketing report. Well, okay, fine, but we need somebody on here. We need somebody sitting on this team. Or even inside of product development, inside of software, there's still little pockets of specializations, and it gets very difficult to rope them into the Scrum process and figure out a cadence and a way to manage their work that works for them.
And I think when we go through this and you talk about who he doesn't report to you, why would he be on that team? Well, guess what? We need cross-functional teams, and who they're reporting to is less relevant than the work that needs to be done. Yep.
And you don't have to change it, right? Like, don't hear us saying that you have to do a reorg or something like that. You do not. It's just we need a cross-functional team. It's as simple as that.
And the thing that I find interesting here is that they will tell you that they need different results.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same breath say, well, we're not going to change how we get the results. Just change the people.
Yeah. These conversations are ones that I almost always take right to the whiteboard. Like, you want X. To get X, you have to do Y. You don't want to do Y. Make the arithmetic work.
Yeah,
right? And we need to kind of draw these things out because a lot of it is just logical fallacy, right? We need to do Scrum, but we can't do Scrum training. We need to double our sales lead volume, but we're still going to manage people by sales close quotas. Right? There's all sorts of things that we shoot ourselves in the foot from the get-go.
It's funny to me that almost invariably manufacturing went through this, 70s and 80s, and they were behind, and then they adjusted to some of the methodologies, and some people haven't. Yeah. Software went through this in the 90s and 2000s. I don't know. You said 2000s. I'll go with 2000s. And now the revenue generating and the business operations needs to go through the same transformation. And the answer the motivation can't be anything other than what we're doing isn't working anymore.
And I think the interesting thing, one of the things that we're running up against this, and why we wanted to have this conversation, like, sure, Scrum started in software. Okay, got it, check. But that's not the end of the argument for us. It's okay, it started in software, but where else could these things apply? And more importantly, now that we've done it in manufacturing and we've done it in software and product, we've had these like pockets of little revolutions and improvements in different parts of the company. The thing that we're running into now, especially at these kind of mid-sized company, $50 million companies plus or minus $40 million, at these kind of at these size companies, the thing that we're running into is it's like, as a leader, as an executive, it's like, wait, I need to know about how to do product development with Scrum, and I need to know how to do lean manufacturing for the hardware, and I need to know how to do this sales method for sales, and I need to okay, this is just like, why are we doing everything differently? And may there be one kind of operating system for the whole company to keep things transparent and clear, and make sure that the leadership has the information they need to make very quick and good decisions.
Yeah, and I'm less tied to whether it's agile, whether it's lean, whether it's theory of constraints, and I'm more tied to the idea of, we have this problem, solve this problem, and make sure you know how to pick the right problem to solve. And I know
we need to be on the same, as an executive team, on the same page as to
we're running down the same chain. How do I identify the right problem to solve? How do we put the right cross-functional team together to solve it? How do we make sure they're interacting in the right possible way? And that's where the framework like Scrum come in.
And there's just some mindset things that because it's hard to train a mindset, but as an executive team, we need to be on the same page for how we value solving these problems, right? Like, we do not accept a gigantic hypothesis and then 9 months of nothingness until you tell me whether or not this thing succeeded or failed, right? So there's a certain set of things that we can pull out of multiple places, lean, agile, Scrum, theory of constraints. Like, we're going to do small batches. We're going to have small feedback loops. We're going to minimize the amount of time that work sits waiting, or the amount of effort and time and money that we spend handing work off. Things and value to our users quickly. So we know that kind of and agree. And from there, if we pick a couple elements from Lean, couple elements from Agile, couple elements, that might work as the whole company is.
Yeah, and I think that, I looking back at the history of how these ideas got adopted, the companies and the frameworks that had some of the artifacts that say, hey, this is a good way to get started. And then the companies that took that, owned the value statements, owned the mission statements, owned the tenets, and made it their own, tend to take off really fast.
Yeah.
And, a couple of the ones that I just absolutely believe in anytime I run a team: transparency. You and I have both laughed as I've been called too transparent multiple times in my life. Data drives good decisions. Use data. Like, yeah, we have some ideas, we have some assumptions, but let's validate that. And then small batch work. What is the smallest way we can take action on this now and learn? Give me those three things, and we can build around that, and we can make that bigger. But those three things lead to good results.
Yeah. Hey, I want to just push back on one thing that people might be thinking if they're listening, which is it might sound like we just made the case for looking at multiple different tools and frameworks and picking from each what you want. And ultimately, yes, that is the case I'm making, because that is the only thing I believe would ever work for your company, because your company is different from all of the other companies. And if you're trying to copy and paste the Spotify model or SAFe or Holacracy or anything else, if you're trying to copy and paste it, it's not going to work. However, the big danger, and the thing that we see companies do all the time, is they start constructing this for their company before they've really learned deeply about the choices that they're making. Right? So they say, we're going to do this thing and this thing and this thing. And almost anybody with a little consulting experience like us that have seen, dozens or hundreds of different companies operate, we can very easily say, okay, well, you've picked to do that thing because it helps the status quo survive here. And you've picked to do this thing because it makes the change effort in this department as low as possible, right? So we're usually picking out of the gate, if we're just picking and choosing parts of different frameworks and trying to stitch together in our own, we're usually constructing something that safeguards the status quo.
I would agree with that, and I think we're on the same page there. The one, I think your don't copy and paste is terrific. And I think when you say theory of constraints and agile, or Scrum's variation of agile, and lean, we can keep going on. The key thing is to understand the principles. And I highly recommend choosing a framework and running it, and then iteratively improving on that framework. Because you've spent a decade doing this. My dad has been introduced these. Literally, I started doing this stuff when I was 13. The idea is that there's some frameworks, and then iteratively improve from that frameworks allows it to be installed in a way that makes progress. If a business owner tries to install this and create it on their own, well, they're doing a lot of rework. So these structures work.
For sure. One of the two things. One is the reason to start with something very simple like Scrum is because structures work, and maybe this is another conversation. I don't know if this is going to be triggering for you, but structures eat culture that eats strategy. This whole debate around mindset and culture and strategy, none of that matters to me anymore if we don't have the right structure in place, because structure is what actually nudges us to communicate in specific ways and at certain times, and at certain that maybe run on a cadence, and we're doing the same event over and over. Anyway, that was a quick aside.
You did trigger me, and I can't let that go. These are all reinforcing things. The structure reinforces the mindset reinforces the structure. All of that, and by the way, and culture comes out of that.
Okay, popping out of our tangent.
Yes.
We should write a book that just goes back and forth between all those things that are truly all interconnected. But we could make strong statements on every side of that argument, I think. Anyway, popping back out of the tangent.
We're out. We're done. Here's the key, and I'm going to summarize this perfectly.
No, hold on.
Transparency of data. No, I'm done. Go ahead, Eric.
No, I want to make the point. The reason to choose a framework and stick with it for a little bit of time is because the thing that it's going to force you to do is learn about everything that your organization does that prevents you from doing this very, very simple framework. Right? Scrum, for example, has 11 things in it. And I'm pretty sure that if you told any CEO that, hey, all you have to do is these 11 things, they'd be like, great, start tomorrow, right? It's a very simple, it's very hard to execute, but the framework is very simple. And the reason that I like starting with it is because it forces us to actually address and have a conversation about the things in our organization that are preventing us from doing Scrum. Because it's those things that prevent us from doing Scrum that are the things that we should actually be working on. Not because we want to do Scrum, that's not the point, but because as soon as we enter this era and say we're going to do Scrum, then we have to do things like form a cross-functional team. That might be very, very hard at your organization. Or we have to do things like get from idea to done every couple of weeks. That might be technically infeasible right now at your organization. These are all fine. But if we change the frame from the beginning, we're going to change it and we're going to say things like, oh, well, our cycles are 9 weeks long, so our sprints are going to be 9 weeks long.
Yeah.
And you're missing the value of this, which is like, no, your sprints can't be 9 weeks long. That is an issue. You have to go work.
I want to jump in there because I think you just mentioned something. When you try to introduce Scrum into other areas, and you focused right on the software side, and I appreciate that. When you try to introduce Scrum to other areas, the number one pushback you get is, I can't focus on that outcome. I have these 80 other things. And then, when you start talking about that, those 80 other things take 9 months to get done, as opposed to if we focused on one at a time, it would take 4 weeks to get done. And so what you're talking about there, I think, is terrific. Let's force the issue on these things. Because delivering done in 2 weeks is unheard of in sales, but we're doing sprints in sales for our clients, and we're getting results in 2 to 4 weeks, including having the client interactions. And the mindset of we have too much to do, so we can't focus on one thing is pervasive, just killing.
Yeah,
pervasive. That's the word I was looking for. It's like a weed.
That's a good example, right? The Scrum teaches us that we need to have one product goal, one sprint goal, and an order to backlog, not 17 number one priorities. And it's not because the framework says so. It's because that actually helps go faster, right? But if we change the framework from the get-go because we think we know better, or we know that we have these 80 things that we have to focus on, we're going to lose the value of going through that hard work of figuring out how to prioritize and focus on one thing at a time.
I love that statement, and I think we should end there. Do the hard work of finding out how to focus on one thing. Maybe that's the first thing you implement.
There it is. All right, Jeff.
Nice Sign off. We're done.
Thanks, sir. Please let us know if there's other topics that you'd love to hear about. Jeff, you have any off-the-cuff ideas for next week?
Yeah, let's talk about creating focus. What's the argument against focus?
There we go. How can a company only have one number one priority? That can't be right.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, that'll be next week. All right, thanks all, and I'm going to end this.